Good morning, Epiphany. So wonderful to see you, see so many of your faces. Just brings me great peace. So I wanted to begin this morning with a story. My wonderful father-in-law, Steve, is a doctor who does mission work in Mexico with Gloria al Padre Ministries, which was founded by his father-in-law, a longtime Baptist preacher. Steve's gone on these mission trips for twice a year, spanning back a couple decades now. In fact, he and his team are headed there to Mexico this weekend, so I ask that you all remember him in your prayers, the whole team. This work brings Steve to some of the remotest parts of the country, where the people have been awaiting medical care for months, if not their whole lives. Steve's often humbled by the folks he meets there, especially the Mexican and indigenous missionaries. He beams when he talks about working alongside them because their own plights for Christ remind him of what Peter and Paul endured. When he's in their presence, it's as though he can reach out and touch the cloak of the early church. Steve likes to tell a story about one such missionary, though he'd never met this one. Rather, he heard the story from a pastor named Gerardo Perez Rivera in the village of Ejido Nuevo, Sacramento, in northern Chihuahua. Or as Steve puts it, us gringos call the place Bricktown. You see, Bricktown is known for the adobe bricks that the villagers fashion from mud and clay and straw. They sun-dry them and then bake them the old-fashioned way. They're fine bricks, fit for a church, in fact. All this brick making and baking leaves the whole town covered in a fine layer of light brown dust. Bricktown is a poor town, and as Steve tells it, if the gringo Charles Dickens had lived in Chihuahua, he would have certainly said a novel or two there. So Pastor Rivera's story about the missionary goes something like this. One gloomy night, long ago in Bricktown, there were two teenage gangsters prowling the streets. Months in their gang had hardened their hearts and their fists. Life was tough, life was rough. It was bite or get bit. They came upon an unassuming man and decided he'd be an easy mark. Cornering the man, one boy faced him with a switchblade while the other shook him down from behind. The boy holding the switchblade almost dropped it because he saw something he couldn't believe. The man wasn't afraid, not at all. He didn't resist. The boy heard the man speaking something. He was praying. Lord, forgive these young men, for they know not what they do. Lord, come into their hearts. The boy with the blade saw his friend shove the man violently to the ground while he was still praying, and then they ran off together, a little richer than they had been just an hour ago on that gloomy night. One of the gangsters' lives would never be the same after that, though. In the months that followed, the boy put away childish things, starting with the switchblade. He quit the gang, he found a church, and was born anew in its Bricktown walls. His family and friends swore up and down this was just a phase, but in truth, it was just the beginning. We know the young man's life was transformed after he robbed the faithful missionary, because the young man was Pastor Rivera himself. By the time Pastor Rivera told Steve the story, it had been 30 years since he brandished his blade. So last week we heard Dr. Schmidt lead us in an exploration of the names of God, from the I Am that is the ground of all being, to the humble name of Jesus, which means God saves. He ended the exploration by challenging us to believe in the power of the name and to glorify it. In today's reading from the Gospel of John, we hear another name for Jesus when he says, I am the Good Shepherd. And then we learn what makes the Good Shepherd good when he adds, I lay down my life for the sheep. The early church would have understood shepherding language well. Like us, they would have encountered it throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, most notably in Ezekiel 34, when the prophet prophesies against the shepherds God had appointed over Israel, because they had become selfish and neglectful of his sheep. Ezekiel foretells a time when God would gather his lost and scattered sheep and place them in the care of one shepherd, the Messiah from the line of David. The early church would have also understood the ins and outs of shepherding, as well as the bond between shepherd and sheep. A good shepherd's sheep hear his voice, they know it is him, and they follow him out of their pen and into open pasture for grazing. They can make out their shepherd's call amongst many shepherds' calls. Sheep follow their shepherd closely as he coaxes them along by their name and by his rod and staff, which he would use to fend off predators. In short, sheep rely on their shepherd for direction and protection, and so they take care to hear, know, and follow their shepherd. Jesus even emphasizes this pattern earlier in the Good Shepherd parable. In John chapter 10, verses 3 through 4, he says, "The sheep hear the shepherd's voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them. And the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." So, brothers and sisters, what is revealed in the name of the Good Shepherd who laid down his life for his sheep? I think it's the wisdom that the appropriate response to Christ's self-giving love is to hear him, know him, and follow him. This is what relationship with Christ looks like. In John's Gospel, Jesus teaches the parable of the Good Shepherd after healing a man who had been blind from birth. This is the sixth sign or miracle that Jesus performs in the Gospel of John. Pairing this sign and then this parable, we see that what the Good Shepherd does for his sheep. We see how the sheep hear, know, and follow the Good Shepherd into relationship. This healing story is rich, and recounting it in some depth is worth our while. The man born blind spent his days begging alongside a dirty road to earn a meager living. Once, he overheard a group of men talking about him. They were excited. It was very unusual for him. They asked someone they called the rabbi whose sin it was that blinded the man. The man heard another voice. It must have been the rabbi's. It was striking, yet strangely familiar. The rabbi replied, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work with the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Suddenly, the man born blind sensed the presence of someone next to him. Someone had stooped down to the ground to meet him. He heard someone spit, and then it was though he was being anointed. The rabbi, whom the excited men called Jesus, spread mud over his eyes. And when Jesus had finished, he said, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." The man followed the instructions. Afterward, he saw his world and everything in it for the very first time. The man who could now see shocked his neighbors and family. Some didn't even believe it was the same person. So they took him to the Pharisees, who peppered him with questions. Oh, those Pharisees were flummoxed and fuming. "Who did this? How?" The man who could see explained everything, and they said, "He did this on the Sabbath? But how could a sinner perform such a sign?" They asked him, "Who is this man?" The man who could see answered, "He is a prophet." The man's parents came before the Pharisees to verify that their son had in fact been born blind, but they didn't back up their son's story because they were afraid of being kicked out of the synagogue. The flummoxed and fuming Pharisees called the man back yet again, and they pressed him further and further. "Who is this sinner?" they asked. I don't know if he's a sinner, but I do know that once I was blind, now I see." "You're his disciple? Where did he come from?" No one has ever opened the eyes of someone born blind. If Jesus were not from God, he could do nothing. The man who could see felt truthful and triumphant, but he knew he would pay for his proclamation. They drove him out of the synagogue. The next day, the man who could see was wandering around the place he used to beg, feeling lost but hopeful. He saw things clearly now, but he had been cut off from his people. At that moment, the Good Shepherd entered into the story again. He approached the man with a half smile and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The question excited the man who could see. "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus told him that he is the Son of Man. And the man who could see fell to his knees and worshiped Jesus. Brothers and sisters, the man born blind became the man who could see after Jesus recognized in him someone through whom God's works could be revealed. And Jesus healed his physical impairment. This physical healing from blindness to sight is a miracle. There's another sense in which the man born blind became the man who could see. The man had heard Jesus and was likely drawn to his voice. He came to know Jesus by his healing touch and by defending him before the Pharisees. After the man had been cut off from his flock, the Good Shepherd found him, and the man followed him into a new flock. This is spiritual healing, from darkness to light, another miracle. 2 healing miracles, grace upon grace. The parable of the Good Shepherd explains the sheep face dangers in the world, such as thieves, wolves, and even those hired shepherds who, when the going gets tough, will fail to protect their sheep. Jesus says that thieves come to steal and to kill and to destroy the sheep, and that wolves come to snatch and scatter them. We saw in the story of the blind man's healing how the Pharisees failed their sheep. They reacted to Jesus healing someone on the Sabbath the same way that all the Pharisees react to Jesus in the Gospels, legalistically, perhaps selfishly. Instead of thanking and praising God that their sheep had been healed, they clutched their proverbial pearls and wondered if Jesus' power and authority is demonic or divine, even though all signs pointed to the latter. And that possibility terrified them because it challenged their own power and authority. God's words for Ezekiel at the beginning of chapter 34 especially resonate as the prophet prophesies against the shepherds of Israel, crying out, "Woe, you shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves. Should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with wool, you slaughter the fatted calves, but you do not feed the sheep. You have not strengthened the weak, you have not healed the sick, you have not bound up the injured, you have not brought back the strays, you have not sought the lost, but with force and harshness you have ruled them." So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and scattered they became food for all wild animals. My sheep were scattered. They wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered all over the face of the earth, with no one to search or seek for them. Some things don't change, do they? If we reflect on thieves, wolves, and false shepherds, we can see our own fallenness. We can see the distorted values of our world today: possessiveness, power, authority, control, and underneath all of it, willful selfishness. We see these distorted values wherever we look, among the nations and their leaders, in our media, in our foes, in our friends, our family, and terrifyingly, in ourselves. But there's good news, brothers and sisters. Ezekiel's promised shepherd from the line of David has come. The good shepherd laid down his life for his sheep. He conquered sin and death so that we can take part in his self-giving love, beginning right here, right now. The Good Shepherd says as much in John chapter 10, verse 10, right before our reading today. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The abundant life, however, does not uphold the values of thieves, wolves, and false prophets in our world. The abundant life turns a clenched fist into an open hand. It turns willfulness into willingness, self-preservation into self-offering. The abundant life is not necessarily an easy or comfortable life either. It doesn't depend on outside circumstances. After all, our self-giving Lord calls each one of us to take up the cross and follow him. Ultimately, the abundant life is the gracious, transformational work of the Good Shepherd in and through our lives as we come to hear, know, and follow him. So, brothers and sisters, let's return to our opening story about the missionary and the gangster he saved who turned out to be Pastor Rivera. I started with this little story because I think it encapsulates the wisdom of the Good Shepherd parable, which is this: when we hear, know, and follow the Good Shepherd who laid down his life for us, we live life abundantly. The story gives us a glimpse into a sheep's abundant life during a particularly precarious moment. In that moment, the Good Shepherd's self-giving love for the whole wide world flowed from the heart of the missionary. Instead of begging for his own life, the missionary prayed for the two lost sheep who were acting like wolves. The 23rd Psalm, which we sang earlier, couldn't be more fitting for this special moment in time when an anonymous saint witnessed to a lost boy and set him on the path to hearing, knowing, and following the Good Shepherd. Brothers and sisters, please pray with me. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. He revives my soul and guides me along right pathways for his name's sake. Though I may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of those who trouble me. You have anointed my head with oil, and my cup is running over. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.